Over the 30 or 40 years of working in this area, there's been some profound changes in farming systems. When we first came to work here at Longerong, it was a fallow wheat pasture rotation, a lay farming, 3-course rotation, which was challenged by low livestock prices at that time, which then farmers looked for alternatives. And one of the big alternatives that first came up was the use of legumes. That happened to be coincident with the development of the intensive animal industries, the pig and poultry industry, so that there was then a market for field peas and some feed grains going into those intensive animal industries. So that was a change which, in some ways, the grain legumes replaced the pasture legumes, although nitrogen removal by the pasture legumes was low, whereas nitrogen removal with the grain legumes is quite high. In fact, there might be nearly as much nitrogen removed in the grain in a pulse crop as is fixed by the legume. So in some ways we saw declining fertilities associated with that time, even though the legume component was still in that rotation. I suppose the next big change, and concurrent with those changes, was the development of low tillage systems, the replacement of fallows. In a lot of ways, fallows were an insurance policy where stored water would be transferred from one year to another. But the fallow guaranteed that you got no crop at all in 1 year and maybe a good crop in the following year. And so the use of fallows declined as farmers took on more of that risk on their own crop management back by saying, well, I'm going to manage the water that's available as best I can with the seasonal conditions as they appear. And so that became focused through some research that was published in the mid-80s by French and Schultz, who identified this water use efficiency of 20 kilograms per hectare per millimetre of rainfall. And that was pretty important because then it set a goal for growers to look at producing their water-limited yield. Nutrition's an important part of that, as is breaking rotations. We did some work early on with the role that nitrogen had in those rotations, and applied nitrogen was only successful if the diseases were controlled with break crops. Now, pulses were one break crop, but equally in the mid-80s, the introduction of canola into our farming system is probably the most profound change we've seen in the past 30 years. The first time I became familiar with canola was when it was grown as a seed crop in the early 80s on this farm at Longerong, with the first blackleg resistant varieties that were of edible oil quality, canola types. And from those very small beginnings, we're now at a point where canola's the third largest grain crop in Australia. And what came also with those canolas was a range of herbicide tolerances. So the first canolas were just generally susceptible to all the herbicides, and then we had triazine tolerant canola, which enabled growers to have another suite of chemical controls in their farming system to address the weeds that weren't just in the canola crop but would carry through to the next cereal or pulse crop. So canola had a profound influence on the development of our modern farming systems, and a big part of that was also in terms of crop nutrition is that the nitrogen management on canola became so much more important. The work I did in part of my PhD was about managing nitrogen and water in canola to look at how you could get the best out of both, and how nitrogen influenced water use in canola. And what we found there was if the crop had good nutrition, good nitrogen nutrition, it covered the ground and reduced the amount of soil water that was lost through evaporation. And that water was then preserved for the canola crop. So the benefit wasn't just in the better growth, it was also due to diverting water away from a non-productive use into a productive use in the crop. So with those sorts of concepts and ideas about nitrogen management, we had a really good crop coming through.